Hi, this is Michelle Capobianco. I'm the CEO of Pancreatic Cancer Canada, and you're listening to our podcast, Unapologetic. Hi, everybody. I wanted to introduce you to two incredible women who are both Canadian, yet living in Los Angeles, and both have gone through the experience of watching their fathers pass from pancreatic cancer. Chellas is a director, producer, and writer for film and television. Some of her best work that you may be familiar with include Mad Men, as well as the film adaptation of American Woman. She grew up in Calgary, and her passion projects and her writing are influenced by social issues and themes that are pervasive in society, so particularly sexism, racism, and political activism. She lives in LA, and she has two children. Jennifer Irwin. Jennifer is also a Canadian. She is a film and television actress, and she grew up in Toronto, but now lives in Los Angeles. She is a graduate of McGill University. You've seen her work in Still Standing, Eastbound Down, the Goldbergs and Superstore. She lives with her two boys and her husband, also in Los Angeles.
So tell me, ladies, Jen, Semi, how did the two of you meet?
We met in LA through mutual friends probably about 20 years ago, would you say? Semi?
Yeah, is it that long? Yes, I think so. I was a fan of Jen as an actress. I think I met you once on the set of a show called Slings and Arrows. That was one of the funniest things ever put on television. But we have mutual friends, and when I came to LA, they connected us, and then we both had little kids, around the same age. So
it was important for you to connect because you're both Canadians. It's like that place, when you go on holiday and you say you're from LA, and they say, "Really? Do you know Bob Smith?"
Yeah.
So
I know.
I assume it's the same thing.
In LA, it always works with Canadians in LA. It's always like, "Oh yeah, I know his ex-wife" or whatever. It's always one degree.
I mean, you kind of run in a pack a little bit because it can be a very lonely city to move to, leaving your friends and family. So, having Semi there and having our Canadian friends there made it, oh my God, so much easier for all of us.
So Jen used to always Jen would put up a water slide in the summer in her backyard. So that was very popular with my children. They still talk about it.
It's still there. It's got little holes in it, but I'll bring it out. When Sam graduates, I'll bring it out for him.
Okay, good.
Or when he gets married, I'll give it to him.
Okay. And both.
Yeah, that's right.
Hopefully in that order.
Yeah.
And so then you, unfortunately, shared something else in common when each of your fathers was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Jen, do you want to, your father was first, unfortunately. Do you want to talk a bit about how you learned about his diagnosis and what your initial reaction was to it?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to remember very easily the moment that they heard that their father, has pancreatic cancer. I was not one of those people. To me, it's a blur. I had to ask my son today when we heard, and he knew it was June 4th at 4 p.m. And I do know that it was over Zoom because we were in COVID, and I was living in LA, and my dad and Betty were living in BC. And I knew something was up because they wanted to talk in private. And I remember the air kind of, being dead. I remember feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. I didn't know a whole lot about pancreatic cancer, but I knew enough to know that it's not a cancer that you want if you have a choice. Immediately Googled. Immediately did all the things you're not supposed to do. Google, WebMD, I did it all. Went down the rabbit hole. And then I think we all as a family just decided, hey, we're going, it feels like you're going to war. So let's go to war and see what we can do. And we immediately made plans. I think the border wasn't open at that time. So we made plans for the day after the border opening, which was July 6th, that we would be on the first flight out to BC, and we made it our mission to spend as much time as we could together. And I'm so glad that we did that. No regrets. My son was in freshman in high school, and we ended up seeing on his report card how many absences he had, and he basically missed 100 days of school, and which he was fine with, and the school maybe not so much, but again, no regrets about that time that we spent together. Um, but I was thinking about this before, knowing the subject matter, and I had remembered that the idea of losing my dad was, as a child, my biggest fear and my brother's biggest fear, because he was such an enormous character and personality, and he was larger than life, and we just idolized him. And we used to write these cards, birthday cards and Father's Day cards, and each one for 10 years said, "Dear Dad, Happy Father's Day. P.S. I hope you never die. P.P.S. Don't die. P.P.P.S. No dying from you. Underline, exclamation mark." So the
Wow.
idea of losing him, neither of us could, never mind, envision it. We couldn't allow it. It was the worst possible scenario. So now when I'd heard that it was uh, not looking good, according to the doctors, um, yeah, your worst fear is kind of being realized.
Yeah. Semi, do you want to talk a bit about when you first heard about your
Well,
dad?
it's one of those really strange. So one of the things I know about Jen is how much she loved her dad and how much she figured in her stories and in her sort of stories about how she became so funny. And so it was the pandemic. I hadn't seen her for a while, but I think maybe you sent an email when he did die.
Mm.
And I wrote her a letter and said, I'm so sorry to hear about your dad, and I know how much he meant to you. And literally, my father was diagnosed like a couple weeks after that letter. It was this, like, it was almost, I can't even. So, and it was a year ago today, actually, I realized, because
Oh,
I have one of those little kid 5-year diaries, and I have kept them always so I can compare the years against the years. And just by coincidence, it was a year ago today. Um,
I'm sorry about
and
that,
it was
Semi. I didn't know
actually,
that.
yeah, I didn't realize that. I mean, anyway, but I was really grateful that I had Jen to lean on and to steer me in some ways into through this. I'm an only child, and my dad went to the doctor for a slight pain in his stomach while I was visiting him last year with my kids for the first time since the pandemic. And we were having a great time, and it's just so hard to imagine that that was a year ago. He went off to the doctor. My parents came back a little bit grim, and they told me they told me what the diagnosis was, and I actually happened to know a couple other people who died of pancreatic cancer very prematurely. And as soon as I heard the word pancreas, I I sort of I was like, oh dear, oh that's just the worst. I Another thing that's very strange about my story is that my dad was given 3 months to live in 1987, and you'd think that that would mean that you could only feel comforted by how far past that he lasted, uh, because he had another condition, but he really managed it well, and I got to have him for another, whatever that is, 35, 37 years or something. Um, but it didn't make it easier.
no.
Yeah. And both of you were in the position of being a daughter, but living far away and trying to figure out how to manage a different country's healthcare system, manage it all remotely, and try to be strong. And of course, as women, you're juggling 17 other things. I mean, it's not like you're just sitting around waiting for a crisis and then you can step in. You're managing families, you're managing careers, you're managing
Mhm.
everything. And you put yourself, I would imagine, on hold while you take care of them. And I want to get into some of the caregiving moments and some of the things that you came up against that you didn't expect in the healthcare system. But I also think it's really important to remember and take a moment to remember the funny parts and to remember the humor in some of these moments. And I'm sure there were moments where you laughed. Jen, you sent me some fabulous videos of you and your dad dancing and singing and just being crazy and just enjoying life. And I was fortunate to have a couple of meals with him where he ordered bacon with a side of gravy. So
Yep.
he was going
He was
full
going
out.
all in. Yeah,
He was going all in. So I would imagine that your sense of humor really played a role in how you manage this. Is that accurate? Is that fair?
Well, I remember, so much of my brother and I we were trying to get him to lose weight over the years because he was a large man. And then he gets pancreatic cancer, and then we spend the last year trying to put weight on him. So, which was actually was what he wanted, was to be eating bacon. Finally, we were able to give him the bacon that he wanted. He was always sneaking bacon, but yeah, we in terms of the caregiving, I was not unfortunately up here and for many of the appointments. I do remember one. I know that my dad called his oncologist Dr. Death behind his back, and it was his nickname. And because every appointment we had was like worse news, and we'd see him come up on the phone and be like, "Oh God, it's Dr. Death," But you have those little in jokes that you need, to give yourself a sense of normalcy. And I remember, I'm not a very controlling person. I kind of more go with the flow, but I did feel like I needed, even if it was a small little bit of control. And I look back now and it seems so silly and ridiculous, but I was kind of in charge of his smoothie in the morning. And again, he had an aversion to all vegetables his entire life. He only ate meat and carbs, potatoes. And I had this in the back of my head that I'm going to finally get in the vegetables that he needs to eat in this smoothie. So I went to a health food store and I broke down in tears and I said, "What can I do for my dad?" And this is some Santa Monica holistic, sales lady. And she's like, "Chaga mushrooms. That's the answer. That will shrink the tumors. Put it in every day. He's got to have chaga mushrooms." So I bought $200 worth of chaga mushrooms, shipped it up to BC, and every morning I would put these chaga mushrooms, broccoli, greens, anything that any sort of greenery into this smoothie, and my kids and I would blend it up, and he would sort of pad out into the kitchen. And it was disgusting. It was disgusting. And it was a giant, thermos, and he'd look at it, and there was a moment of understanding where we knew what was going on. He's like, "Is this chocolate?" And we said, yeah, it's chocolate. Yeah, you're eating chocolate milkshake. And we'd put a little sprinkle of chocolate on top, and he would down it. God bless him. It was disgusting. I couldn't take a sip of it. But for some reason, it made us feel like we were doing something. Maybe we were prolonging his life by 45 minutes, but it made us feel better.
My thing, like the funniest moment, I think, except for the hospital, which was like humor was the only thing that kept me breathing. But pancreatic cancer sucks and it's very painful, as we know. And I was going back and forth a lot trying to help my parents. They were still in lockdown from the lockdown, and because of other issues, really couldn't afford to leave, to go out in the world. So they were navigating this whole world of illness without any kind of social, in-person ties, which is terrible. So anyway, I was flying up there a lot, which is this weird thing because I was leaving my family behind and being a daughter again and living in this house that I hadn't lived in, decades or whatever. And I drove by like the little strip mall by my house, which is very suburban Calgary, and saw that the old pizza joint next to the 7-Eleven had become a cannabis store. And I thought, oh, like maybe that's the answer. So I went into the cannabis store and I was like, "My dad has cancer." And the guy came over and he was so knowledgeable or whatever. And then all of a sudden he goes, "Sammy? Are you Sammy?" I was like, "Yeah." And he was like,
"You knew him?"
Well, he goes, "I went to Churchill. I was probably your drug dealer in high school."
And he still is.
Exactly.
I was like, I didn't do drugs in high school. It's so hilarious. I couldn't believe it. And he was like, yeah. Anyway, that was like, I was dying. And then, so there was like a lot of weird, surreal moments like that where it was, me and my mom and dad sort of without my kids or without, a partner around or whatever, we're sort of like reverting back into this high
Yeah.
school kind of world. That was very odd. And I really did end up going just there to be around as much as I could, but sort of in back and forth stints. I felt like to what you were saying before, Michelle, like toggling between being a daughter and a mom and a daughter and a mom, daughter, mom, So
Which is exhausting.
not a lot of,
It is.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so let's talk about the hospital experience for you, Semi. And I know the one thing that always stood out for me, Jen, with your stepmom and your dad was their inability to get their oncologist on the phone and have or in a reasonable, timely manner and have a good, solid conversation. And your dad asking Betty to go and get flowers to bring him on the appointment because maybe that would soften him up enough
Yeah,
to,
we tried cards, money, anything to sweeten the pot, but Dr.
I
Death
mean,
was busy.
But
Betty had a better name for him. I don't have a better name. I think she called him Dr. Dingaling.
Oh,
She
yeah.
she had she had a number of names for him that she used to call me. But I mean, the idea that that could perhaps be a solution is insane. Is
Mm.
insane. And
yeah.
Semi, is it fair to say you just
Well,
about laid down your life at the hospital, right along the edge of the entrance?
yeah, I had a couple. I mean, my dad was in the hospital, a couple of months before he died he was jaundiced and he was very, very itchy and it was awful. It was like a ring of hell. But I flew up to help and went straight from the airport to the hospital. And my mom was there and she was exhausted. And I said, go home and sleep and I'll stay overnight. And, because I don't know what people do that don't have family around them because there were so many needs in the night that couldn't be met. And I don't think it was anyone slacking off. It certainly wasn't. There was a COVID outbreak on the ward, which meant that those patients were one-to-one with the nurses. There was also in that same ward, you're going to get people who are, have liver disease or whatever. And were very unruly. And anyway, so the first thing that happened was in the middle of the night, they came to take my dad and put him into a shared room. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. He can't go in a shared room. He's so immune compromised. He hasn't been out of his house since 2019. And he's not going in a shared room on a COVID ward, on a COVID outbreak ward. And I stood in front of the door and I was like, no, 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 you can't come take him. And they were like, we have to move him. I'm really sorry. And I was like, well, you're going to have to move me first. And I just like sat down in front of the door. And I sat there and I was
Wow.
like, literally, you're going to have to pick me up and carry me away because I'm not moving from this door. I was a full Karen. I was like, I need to see whoever's in charge. And I said, to see who's in charge of them. And I need to whatever. And I basically filibustered it because like 2 hours later, I got the charge nurse came out. We argued for a while. But it is, you have this weird obsequious feeling like we're like smiling really hard at everyone and trying to be really pleasant and really, really stubborn. And finally I got my way and he was left in that room for a while anyway. And then the next night, so then I went home and slept all day. I went back for the night, passing my mom. And the next night, he was on a drip that he needed constantly because of other issues. And it ran out and the IV thing went off in the middle of the night and went off and went off and went off and no one came. So I went out on the ward in the middle of the night and I was like, can someone come and please, help my dad with his IV bag. So a nurse came in and unhooked it and started to leave. And I said, no, 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 you have to change it. That's a drip he needs. And she said, no, no, dear, the medicine's in him now. And I said, no, 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 that's not what it is. Please look on his chart. He needs it all the time. And she said, no. And she left. And I was like, so I followed her out and I was like, I'm really, really sure he needs this drip. You have to just look on his chart. Please just look on his chart. And she was like getting irritated with me and saying, it's fine. He's had the bag or whatever. So I took out my phone and I said, I'm going to call 911 and I'm going to tell them that I have a life-threatening situation on the third floor of Fit House Hospital. And
Wow.
she was like looking at me, and I was like, doot, doot, doot. And she was like, went on the computer and looked. And then I like hung up, and she was like, oh, and I was right. She went and changed the bag. But I mean, in both those cases, one was more me defending what I wanted for my father. The other was life and death. And I think part of the reason me and my mom were fierce about that is we've had a lot of other hospital experience over the years and learned that you are your own best advocate. You and your family or your friends or whoever is around you are going to know more and track it as well as the constantly rotating, overworked, overtaxed, and probably at this point traumatized staffs of those hospitals. And my parents kept thick written out records of everything and would write down everything the doctor said and everything that he needed and sort of kept their own charts. And that's like the one piece of advice I go around like collaring people and saying, like, from the first moment where someone says, well, we're going to do a test, like pick up a pen and start writing down everything they say. You don't know what is going to matter later, and you don't know what you're going to forget that you thought you would never forget. It's so
Mm.
stressful that you just leave your body so many times and you don't know when. So anyway,
If I'm ever
but
sick, I'm
luckily
going
I
to hire
married Chellas.
you. I want to
Yeah,
hire you if I'm ever sick to lie across my
I
entrance
will
to my
lie
hospital
across
bed.
your
Okay.
door.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. It's like,
Wow. That's
you have to
quite
carry me out. You're
amazing.
going to have to carry me out. I was like, you're going to have to pry my father from my cold, dead hands.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll be in
it's
the hospital for
interesting.
like a cold sore, but I'll still.
We'll still tell you. That's interesting. You fast forward 6 months, and there is now an Alberta oncology nurse at 46 who has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And so she was up on the oncology unit up until when she was diagnosed. And so we've been talking
Wow.
to her about what would you do differently now as a nurse, and what are you saying to your fellow nurses about what they need to be aware of, because it's really opened her eyes towards what actually happens on the hospital. And she has, to your point, Semi, about they're probably overworked and all, she has all that feeling as well. But she still felt that there were really important lessons and things that doctors, especially, but nurses as well, really needed to hear from patients and their families. So, on that note, Jen and Semi, is there something particular you would want with the treating physician or any of the specialists or any of the people you saw to know about your dads, about the experience, about what you want them to do differently the next time they're faced with this kind of situation?
I do know that after my dad had passed, and again, we were very respectful of the fact that this was a small town, that when they were short of an oncologist, and so it was overly stressed community medically wise. But I think we never heard back from the GP or the oncologist, and then just like even a call, a 2-minute call, because you do go on a journey with um, they're lovely people. You take a journey with them when you're diagnosed to your end of life, and it's so meaningful for the families to know. And I know, of course, we know you're a number in a large system, and lots of people, and they, their resources are required somewhere else. But taking that 30 seconds to call and say, your dad's life had meaning, or, I have a nice memory of him. My dad, did bring flowers and brought cards or whatever. And he tried to make it easier for the medical staff and the doctors. And he would lighten the mood, and he would kind of tee it up for them so they wouldn't have to give him the bad news, which is must be a horrible thing to have to do. But just that moment to take a second to say your life is important. And we didn't get that. And so yeah, I don't know if there's time for that, but I think there's always time for a minute, right? A minute call.
Well, there certainly was time. I know when Betty was speaking to her GP afterwards and said something like, I didn't hear anything from the oncologist. There was time enough for the GP to say, well, I think they've moved on. So if there's time
That's
enough
what
for
he
that
said.
comment,
Yeah.
there's time
Yeah.
enough for something a little better.
The other thing that I feel very still like kind of vulnerable about was that my dad really thought that it harmed his case or it harmed people's opinion of him that he sought second opinions. And that was a really hard thing to navigate because he did seek a second opinion from another doctor, and that doctor concurred completely with the treatment. So it was all good. So it didn't need to be mentioned until he didn't. And there was a point at which the doctors diverged, and none of us really knew what to do. And the feeling of helplessness and fear of like offending someone, um, not just that they would be punitive, but that they would actually be offended or, not being able to really weigh those opinions. But the alternative is you put your entire life in someone's hands that you can't necessarily get on the phone, or who is going to rightly take a vacation during your death, right? Like during the time that you're in chemo or whatever. So I think there's a really simple solution, because I've seen it in production stuff, which is make it mandatory that everyone has, or even the doctor says, I want you to go get a second opinion and come back to me with it. I want to hear it. And I know that goes again against the grain and now how it's always been done. But if you made people go see a second doctor, or solicit a second doctor, or have somebody else look at the slides, you would eliminate so much of the discomfort and fear about it by just making it mandatory. So that's my pitch.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that experience of helplessness is just unlike anything else I've had. And it wasn't even my life on the line.
I
Awful.
mean, Jen, we went through a version of that with your dad, with getting a second opinion in BC, and even getting the treating physician to acknowledge that there was another opinion or another doctor. And you get the one doctor. In both your cases, actually, the second opinion was willing to do anything and talk at any time and help in any way to make it okay for the original doctor. And both original doctors were snubbed or annoyed. And unfortunately, we hear it all the time. The challenge with pancreatic cancer, as you both know, there is so little time. And so to hold on treatment while you're waiting for a second opinion can be deadly. And yet there's a need for the second opinion. But I think it certainly starts with the way the primary oncologist you're dealing with speaks to you and deals with you, and needs to leave the arrogance at the door and become a human as well, because you need them to be both, especially in those types of situations.
Well, that's right, and it is too bad that ego does come into play. I mean, to your point, Semi, if you were buying a car, you would certainly get 2 or 3 or 4 opinions, right? So you'd think in this case that it would be a no-brainer that you would be allowed. And I think we had the same feeling, like we were worried about trampling on people's feelings, doctors' feelings, or egos, and that's really not where our focus should have been. But that was something, my dad, even the way he would thank you so much for taking 30 seconds to talk to me. And I think we sent flowers to receptionists who put us through to the doctors, and some doctors, one doctor we called wasn't able to get back for 6 weeks. And as you know, when you have pancreatic cancer, that's a long time to be waiting for another opinion. And yeah, it's again, no, like, listen, that is a hard job, and props to anyone who's able to take that job on. But I agree, there must be a better way, and I like this idea of mandatory second opinions, because then it's just not, you just do it.
Right. All sort of fail safes that I've ever experienced in production or in any kind of like creative situation, you have to make them mandatory, because everyone would love to do it, but when there's no time and there's limited resources or whatever, you're making prioritizing decisions all the time. And the other thing Michelle said to me, I think early on, she said the thing about oncologists is they like to win and they see death as losing. And so you're like, there's a kind of, I don't even know, competitiveness, or like there's a sort of thing where the question of death and the topic of death is not raised by the same people that are trying to keep you alive. And that's very difficult, right? Because I haven't experienced it directly, but what I imagine it feels like if you're the sick person is, wait, this guy says that I can be treated and it's going to be maybe okay, and this person's trying to get me to think about end of life stuff, and they feel like they're at odds, and it's very confusing, and you're continually having to put your trust in somebody and make some call, and all of that is so taxing in a time when what you want to do is kind of settle in and, I don't know, smell the roses,
Yeah.
Well, what's supposed to happen in an ideal world is that you are referred to a palliative team at the point of diagnosis, because palliative is not a stage. Palliative care is about pain and symptom management. And people who get palliative care from the day of a serious diagnosis live longer. They take their meds longer, they're available for clinical trials longer. And the goal of palliative care is to look at the whole human, to look at the spiritual aspects, the family aspects, all of the things that happen. Whereas an oncologist is rightfully just focused on the tumor, and his or her goal is to get rid of it. And yes, to win. And it's too often a hard handoff between the oncologist and the palliative doctor. So it gets to the point where the oncologist believes that he's not going to win and the patient is not going to make it. And they turn it over to a palliative, and you never see the oncologist again. And that's a horrible, horrible moment for families and for individuals. It's not the way it was supposed to be. Were either of you, do you remember anyone talking to you about palliative care, the importance of it early on?
You,
Besides me.
that's the only one. It was only
Yeah,
you, and then we ended up sort of scrambling, trying to get the numbers and get through and figure out. It was so confusing to navigate because my dad was only in the hospital briefly, and but we just, it's also a hard when it doesn't have a face. The palliative care, it just does sound like the end, like it needs a rebrand.
it does need a
Because when you're
rebrand.
not talking to someone about these things and you're being told this person's going to like intervene in your family life, your spiritual life, and your legal things and your medical, you're like, whoa, no, 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 I don't want that. I want to, batten down the hatches and really figure this out as a family. But then it did turn out to be incredibly helpful to make those connections.
You're
But
talking
yeah, it
about
needs a
people
new
not
name.
wanting to talk about death, and it's something we deal with sort of all the time, and people just don't even want you to say the word sometimes. Has it changed the way you talk about death, the way you talk to your kids, the way you talk to other people about the experience? Have you talked much to other people about what you've been through?
I definitely wanted, I reached out to a lot of people to ask because I wanted a roadmap of what I could expect. Um, yes, with my dad's passing, but also like the inevitable grief process. I wanted to know. I didn't want to be sideswiped by anything. And so everyone has, their list of the denial, the depression, anger, and all those. You cycle through all of them. But anyone who's had to grieve, that it takes on takes on its own thing. It's its own kind of beast that walks with you. And um, but we had. I think I was just talking about this with my stepmom and my kids. In many ways, my dad had a wonderful, beautiful death, and I'm really grateful that he did. It was unexpected in terms of he deteriorated quickly, and I think he knew. His days were numbered. We didn't. We were actually planned a trip. We were going to go to Tofino as a family. And then his pain started to spike a little bit. And so my stepmom said, well, let's get your pain under management. You guys go ahead. We'll meet you there in 24 hours. And I went into his room right before we were about to leave to drive my husband and my kids. And I said, okay, well, we'll see you in 24 hours. And you'll be there. We'll get everything set up at the hotel. And he said, yes, I hope that's the case. He said, but if it isn't, I want you to know I've had a good life. And I want you to know that I've had a great wife and I have two wonderful kids. And I said, Dad, it's just pain. You'll be there 24 hours. And he said, again, I hope so, but if not, it's okay. And we made our way to the hotel, and he called me and he said, did you get your money back from my room? And I'm like, Dad, why are you focusing on this? You're worried about the money. I said, don't worry about the money. I'll eat the money, but don't worry about it. And he goes, tell you what, tell them I'll be dead in 5 days. And because he wanted that money, it was important to him that he would get the refund. And I'm like, I'm not working the death angle, Dad. I'm not working the cancer angle. That was just real. And he said, just tell him I'll be dead in 5 days. And he was dead in 5 days. So we kind of rushed back.
Wow.
He took a turn for the worse, and we rushed back, and we hired a death doula. I'm not sure if that's the official term they go by, but we hired a lady, and thankfully she kind of walked us through, and she would say, okay, now is the time when you guys should be lie in bed beside him and tell him things, or play music, or he can hear everything. Take that time, and he maybe has 24 hours left, and then she would come back and revisit and say, okay, and she could tell that it was close, it was near. So we had that time to say everything we wanted to say, and which we did up that whole year. I was very grateful. My dad never tiptoed around death, was very upfront about it, he was the first one to mention it, so people didn't feel uncomfortable. And when we knew, that the last doctor's appointment with his numbers had gone up, we took a walk, and I couldn't breathe. I was just, felt suffocated that this loss was imminent. And he said, I'm not worried about you. You're going to be just fine. And knowing that he had that confidence that I was going to be okay, gave me that confidence that it's going to be okay. And so I'm thankful for that. And he talked very openly about it, and what he wanted for Betty, his beloved wife, and how he wanted her to live, and he didn't want us to dwell, and wanted us to get out there and carpe diem and seize the day and say yes to everything. So that's what we're trying to do. Through the grief, we're trying to, honor his wishes to live a big life, and because that's how he did it. So I was very proud.
And that's why you were whitewater rafting yesterday.
Yes, in snow, in a blizzard. Plus, I couldn't get my deposit. That's the real reason why I didn't.
You are your father's daughter.
Yeah.
I feel like, I kept thinking, seriously, blizzard be damned. I kept thinking about it when it was happening, that this is one of the most universal experiences. As I said to my dad, well, at least this is the right order, right? It's better in some way than I was hit by a car a couple of years ago, and when I flew into the air and saw all the traffic and the street, I thought, when I hit that pavement, all those cars are going to run over me, and that's it. And at that moment, I was like, oh God, it's so weird that I would die before my parents. I thought that while I was being hit by the car, right? So, but that doesn't make it easier. That it doesn't make it any easier, and the universalness of it is so odd because it's so different for everyone. Everyone has such a specific relationship with their parents and with their own mortality, and so, despite the fact that I know a number of people who lost a parent in the last couple of years, not all of us had much to discuss in terms of that. It's, as Jen said, everyone moves through grief in their own way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't compare. I mean, when I had a baby, I remember walking through the hospital with my newborn baby, looking at the baby and thinking, nobody told me that babies look like this, because newborns look really different from any baby you ever see, right? Because nobody's going to show you their newborn. And you're not going to put a newborn in a TV show or on a movie or whatever. They're always a little filled out and 4 weeks old or whatever. And I had the same feeling when we were in the very end of my dad's life, where I was like, wow, the people I'm now around have seen people die a lot. And they know it. It's like what Jen said, they know this is the last heart, or these are the last hours, or this might hurt. But I suddenly thought, wow, I'm around all these people who've seen people die. And before this moment, I don't know how many people in my entire life I've been with who have been at a death. And I was really struck by that it's not just that we don't talk about it, it's that, in this century, in this world, we are so removed from it that it's hard to, all the wisdom of death and the, I don't know, the knowledge of death, it feels like it's been lost or something.
Given the business that each of you are in, how will you manage it moving forward? Semi, will you write about it? Will you write about death differently? Jen, if you're acting in a role where you've lost someone or are yourself going through it, do you think it'll change the way you do what you do, your professions?
Well, that would be method acting, and I'm not a good actor. I'm not a good enough actor to do that. Whenever I've been needed to cry, I always think of the scene from Sound of Music where they get taken away, the Nazis take away the family, and I've used that for 20 years, and it's worked for me.
Oh no! Now you said it. Will it go away now that you said it?
It might. But that was my go-to. I don't know. I think someone gave me a poem about death, and I don't remember now. I can't remember who the poet was. American. Who's American? Updike. John Updike wrote a poem about death, and he talked about, yes, obviously, like the physical presence is gone and you're grieving that, but you also grieve like that specific magic that person had that took a whole lifetime to perfect. And that, for me, like the in-jokes that my dad and I had, the comedy routines that we had. I mean, he was a comedian. He didn't, he was just a joyful, alive, charismatic person. And so I think that's the hardest part is missing the shared history. And but I know what he would want is for me he doesn't want me dwelling. He doesn't want me grieving. That would sadden him. And he always said, say yes to every job that comes. You never know where it will lead you. Even don't let fear stop you from doing anything. Jump into the fear. So that's what I'm going to try and do from now on, hopefully. Let's see.
I feel
What
like,
about you, Sammy?
again, it's like when I think about writing about it, Jen just said it so beautifully, but I think, again, it's like a heartbreak, losing your father. These things happen to so many people, and so many people write about them, and so many people try to talk about it that you think, well, what do I have left to add? But my father is a singular man. There is no one like him. He was an incredible musician. He's an incredible guitarist and just a man of almost of a different era, and his kind will not come again. And I think that it somehow needs to be preserved or somehow expressed. And I have actually, over the years tried to represent some of the things of him in my work, and I'll correct everyone's grammar for as long as I live in his honor.
He was a musician?
He was a jazz guitarist. Yeah. He was also a philosopher. He was a philosopher for many, many years, and then he retired early from being a professor to play guitar. And like I said, in January 2020, he and my mom locked down because they were like, I know what this is. This is a pandemic happening, and we are not getting it. And they really were alone. And then in March of 2022, he suddenly texted me really casually and was like, yeah, we have a gig at this old cafe where he used to play an open mic. Yeah, we have a gig in March. And I was like, wait, what? You have a gig? And he said, yeah, we've been able to practice on this software. And I was like, so you have a Zoom gig? And he was like, no, in person. So after 3 years of lockdown, with kind of no warning, they did one in-person rehearsal and then they played a gig at this cafe in Calgary. So I flew up to it, and it was before his diagnosis, but I flew up and I sort of thought, I just got on a plane because I was like, this might be the last performance. It was an amazing gig too. He was like, that was one of our best gigs.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad you had that. That's,
Yeah.
you never forget that moment, right? And they must have been so proud of you. My goodness, your dad must have, like, you obviously came from very smart people, but look at this, like, enormous success. He got to see your enormous success. And
Well, and your father too. I'm not surprised at all that he wasn't worried about you. I'm not worried about you. You
he
seem
loved
great.
my performance as herpes girl number 3 in the Nia Vardalos movie of the week. That was, he didn't see a
You
lot of my.
know, dad trivia is that Jen was also my dad's favorite actress. Again, from Slings and Arrows, he thought that she was the funniest human being on the earth, and if he saw that she was in anything, he would watch it because you just like hit his funny bone.
It's
Yeah.
funny. The later the older I get, it used to be like, every actor has these like groups that you kind of hit, right? So it used to be like quirky sister, quirky single sister, and then it was like quirky lawyer, and then it was like corporate bitch for like 10 years, and now it's just I'm just a Karen. It's like every breakdown is Karen. She's a Karen. I'm kind of easing into my Karen years. Hopefully, and then I'll be into the Betty White years.
And then
Hopefully,
you'll be,
if
and
I'm so
then
lucky.
yeah, then you'll be the DA. Then you'll have your DA years.
No one's ever cast me as a DA. No, I don't think I don't have enough
Quirky
credibility yet.
DA. I can see a quirky DA. I was the,
Let's pitch it.
it's funny about Karen that like that idea of a Karen, and which is a horrible thing to actually be, but is not the same as requiring people to come and help you out with your problems. Which I kept having these moments, like when I stood in front of the door, where I thought, am I just being like, what am I doing right now? Am I just, ruining everyone's day with my demands? And it's like I grab everyone that I can and say, like, ask for all of it. You deserve it. Like, ask for it. It's there. I think that it's worth saying that the people that we dealt with in the, across the healthcare profession, they're all different personalities, obviously, but have been so traumatized by the last few years and what they've been through and what they've seen. They're so short staffed, and, the COVID outbreak made them even more short staffed because everyone who wasn't with a COVID patient had like 8 people. And, I really feel for them, and I really hope that there's like a fresh wave of people who are called to do that because,
Yeah.
you know, it's a hard job.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you both enough. But not only for doing today, but just how warm and open and honest you've been over the last year or so, at varying different times for each of you, to welcome me into your families and let me try to do whatever I could to help. And mostly I'm grateful for having met each of your fathers because each of them was a special, unique man. And it is a real loss. But their personality, their uniqueness, their legacy clearly lives on in each one of you. And I just can't wait to see all the other great things that you do.
That's so kind. I'm sure we both feel this way, but I want to throw it back at you that I'm
Oh,
so grateful for everything you did and all the support and wisdom and insight that you brought because it really, and you too, Jen, like I feel like there was just, it meant so much to me to have that support and I don't know, experience and support.
we're here for each other. You have to be. And Michelle, you flew out to Vernon, BC. You'd never met my dad, and you spent an afternoon with him, and you stayed in contact, and you were on it. And if there were any questions, you were answering right away, and doing everything you could to make his time better. And our family is will always be very grateful to you for everything you've done. And I'm feel very lucky, hey, that we've got a friendship here that will continue. And, yeah,
Yes, we will always have breakfast in LA, the three of us.
yeah, that's right.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about us, visit www.pancreaticcancercanada.ca and stay tuned for the next episode of Unapologetic.